we'd go to practice and we'd wear our helmets, but it was like a pro day. And all we would do is we'd do physical stuff to stay in shape, run and calisthenics and things like that. But most of the time, we would work half the practice on offense and half the practice on defense. And we had two tight ends that were awesome. Frankie Cardone and
Cardone, that was it.
Michael Craig, and then we had a guard named J.R. Miller. Those three guys were like the Three Musketeers. When they went in the shoots, they would challenge each other. And they would be in the shoots, and the whole team would be there. And they would be taking each other on. I mean, it was awesome. We always had great fullbacks. We had Sean, then we had Reno Farid, then we had Mark Franklin. I mean, we just had them year after year after year there, and we lived with the belly. I mean, we ran belly and belly option until the cows came home.
We are back for part 2 of our Coach John Kopp discussion, and it's it's always neat for me to be able to have conversations and listen to the generation before me who were coaching before me, that even as I was coaching, as an assistant coach, I had the opportunity to be in games that you were coaching in, and when you were at Fitch and I was at Chaney, and having these conversations with Coach Burtis over the years, and hearing different stories and hearing different things that have happened, and kind of hearing the inside scoop of how things took place is always interesting to me. So, this is kind of the same thing that I'm interested to hear about all of your travels, all of your experiences, all the places you've been, and the differences that you made. So, if you just want to start off with maybe your venture into coaching. We talked last time a lot about your playing and how you got into the coaching ranks and what took you there.
Okay, thanks, Dallas. When I was a young man, still playing football, I had some coaches who I really respected and looked up to them. One of them was Nick Johnson, who for a long time was the coach at St. Columba, and they were outstanding. They used to go to the games in yellow cabs, the Balney Rogers. And when I first came back from Pitt and was at YSU, this would have been, I got out of the Army in 62, so it had to be the fall of 62. I got out in August, and he started a 5th and 6th grade program at St. Charles out in Boardman. And I happened to run into him, and he asked me what I was doing, and I told him, and he says, well, why don't you come out and help me coach these 5th and 6th graders? I'm just starting the program. So I did, and because I had so much respect for him, I coached him with that one year in 62 at St. Charles. And in 63 and 64, I played at YSU for Dyke Beatty. And then after the 64 season, I had another year to go to graduate, and my eligibility was used up. Well, Dyke hired myself and Paul Richardson, who was from Chaney, to be the freshman coaches. At that time, freshmen were ineligible for varsity. They had to play their own schedule. And I think we had a 6 or 8 game schedule. And besides coaching the freshmen, we also scouted for the varsity. And that kind of really was interesting for me. I was a little bit older because I had been at Pitt, and then I'd been in the Army. Then I came back to YSU. So when I was playing at YSU, I was 24 and 25 years old. I was playing with, like Ed Mady was a freshman the first year I was at YSU, and Ed had just graduated from Chaney, was 16 years old. He didn't turn 17 until October. And, as soon as he got on the field, you could see the kid was going to be a great player. I mean, he was one of the guys that played on the line who could run with the backs. And when he was at Chaney, he ran the hurdles and relays and stuff like that, besides being a nose man and a guard in football. And that is what got me started. And then I graduated. And when I graduated, I got hired by Commercial Shearing to work in the sales department. And I worked there for a couple of years, but by that time, Ed Klein had come back from Canton to Fitch, was working for Jimmy DeRamo, and I started going to the games because he was the defensive coordinator. And after the games, they would go to Blake's Bar down there on Salt Springs Road, Salt Springs and Vestal, and they invited me down. So I got to know all the coaches. I was talking to them, and then they started getting on me. You got to get into coaching. We'll get you a teaching job. We'll do this. We'll do that. And I was working at Commercial. I loved the people I worked with, but I wasn't that crazy about the job. And so they had an opening, and Jim hired me, and I went to Frank Old, the first year I ever coached in school. And I taught history and geography, and was an assistant coach in football and in basketball. And I was there that 1 year. And then in the spring of '69, Ed Klein got the head coaching job at Ursuline. And that's when I went to Ursuline. And I was at Ursuline in 69, 70, and 71. And then my wife was pregnant, had our twins, Julie and Daniel, in May of '72. And at the same time, she was in the hospital. Ed Mady was there. His wife had just had their daughter, Jennifer. And we ran into each other in the hospital. And he asked me if I wanted a job, and he needed coaches. And I said, well, I think I got a shot at the Ursuline job. And because my brother-in-law, Ed Klein, left to go to the University of Toledo as a quarterbacks coach. And Bobby Stoops and I were on that staff, along with Palumbo and Joe Saramuga. I mean, the four of us all became head coaches at one time or another at a different school. And we thought it would be between Bubbles and I, Coach Stoops, and we made an agreement that if one of us got the job, we would stay and work on the staff. As it happened, they gave the job to Jim Mon, and I called Ed Mady that day they made the announcement. I went down to the Youngstown Board of Education, filled out an application, put it in, and so did Paul Palumbo. And Bobby Stoops had one, but he didn't fill it out. And we started fitness at Chaney maybe the 1st of July, and I was over there working, and they made a beef about me getting hired into the city over guys who were already in the city. But Ed followed the procedure. He interviewed all those guys, but he wanted to hire me, and it worked out. I mean, I told him we were getting ready for two-a-days. I hadn't been hired yet. I said, hey, Ed, I got 4 kids. I got to get a job. My last paycheck was July 1st at Ursuline. I says, if I don't get hired, I got to go find a job. He says, don't worry about it. He went to the principal and said, hey, I told this guy he has a job. He got 4 kids. You don't hire him, I'm going to resign as the coach. I got hired at the next board meeting. And that's how
were you teaching at Chaney as well?
Yes, I taught social studies. I taught government. I taught American history. I even taught health for 1 year. I was a health and phys ed teacher But those guys, they get in those jobs, they never leave. And so if I hadn't had a teaching field in history and government, I would have never had a job. And then I was with Ed for 7 years, from 1972 through the 78 season. And it was just a great time to be there. It's great when you coach for somebody, you respect them, but you're all also friends with them. And Ed and I, we were like brothers. And I was there in 72, 73, 74. We had Matt Kavanaugh in 72 and 73. He was the quarterback, and then he went to Pitt. And then we had the undefeated team in 74, Ronnie Calcagni, who had been rated as one of the 100 top running backs in the country. We moved him to quarterback. We won all the games, and he went to Arkansas. And in that year, in that 1 year, he and Matt Kavanaugh were both on the covers of Sports Illustrated. Kavanaugh won the national championship at Pitt in, I think it was 76. That's when Dorsett won the Heisman Trophy. Johnny Pelusi from Chaney was a captain. He was the center. His younger brother, Jeff, was a linebacker. And then his other brother, JC, he had been he'd gone to Ursuline for 3 years, transferred to Chaney his senior year, made All-State as a tight end. And then he went to Pitt, and they moved him to noseman, and he ended up playing nose for Pitt. But and then we had John David Angelo and Mike Angelo. I mean, we had those famous West Side families, and I worked with Ed and Bob Garkar, who was awesome. Gark had lost a couple fingers working in the meat market, and I was on a headset up in a press box, and this kids would be pushing Ed out on the field. He'd be getting out to the hash mark. And I'd tell Ed in that headset, I'd say, hey, Ed, you got to tell the kids to get back. They're going to flag you. You're almost on the hash mark. Well, all he would do is he'd say, Bob, the kids are on my back. And Gark wouldn't even turn around. He'd just go, boom, boom. And you'd see two kids fly out of the line, and they'd all back up, His two kids played for us. They were good players, David and Bobby Jr. And Joe Lutzy was the defensive coordinator through the 74 year. And then he got into administration. The fall in 75, that's when Ronnie came from. He had been at Syracuse, a GA. He came back. Billy Drewschak, who had been a GA there and coached with us in 73, 74, and 75. Then he went to Texas. And we just, we had such great camaraderie among the staff. The staff got along. They cared about each other. They worked hard. They cared about the kids. It was just a great situation. I can remember all those starters on the offensive and defensive line in 74. I could give you their heights, their weights, their numbers. And that's almost 50 years ago. And those guys were unbelievable. We played 22 kids that year. Nobody played both ways. We had starting 11 on offense, starting 11 on defense. And the kids we had, Jeff Pelusi, I've said this in all the places I've coached, was by far the best defensive player I ever coached. He would, in practice, he wouldn't even hit a kid. He had hands were like two hams. They were like this. They were as thick as my two hands put together. Kids would come out to block him. He'd just put his hands on their helmets and push them to the ground. But when we played the games, oh, man, he had those disappearing tackles. You'd see a guy running with the ball, all of a sudden he'd disappear. 51 would be on top of him. It was, and I never could figure out. We had him and Ronnie Yoswick were the linebackers. And Yoswick was a good player in his own right and went to Columbia and played. And so did Jimmy Pelusi. And Jeff went to Pitt. But he just, I mean, they were like pancake tackles. He averaged his senior year maybe 3 or 4 of those. And after, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Coach. So you kind of touched on something that stands out. So as you come back and you're spending that year coaching freshman ball, you're essentially Coach Mady's coach at YSU.
Yes, but you could see Ed never played freshman football. I mean, he was that good as a freshman. When we were up there at Camp Fitch, we worked with him in that, but you could see the kid was going to be a great player. I played with him when he was a freshman. That was my last year at YSU. So I played with him for a year. The year I coached, he was already a sophomore. And he was already established as one of the best players Dyke had.
So as you get that entryway and that opportunity and coaching freshman football, can you give a little insight into what preparation and what the expectation that was kind of getting kicked down from Coach Beatty to you guys in terms of preparing you for a career in that?
Yeah, well, we would be in the meetings up at the lake. That year that we coached freshman football, we lived in a tent, Paul Richardson and I, with Jim Vicarelli, who was the defensive coordinator at YSU, who later on went into the NFL, was the defensive coordinator of the Rams, and I think the Jets. He came back. He had been a great player at YSU when it was Youngstown College. And we learned a lot from him, just questioning him and asking him about things like, what do you think about this? And how do you feel about that? He was very forthcoming as far as talking to Paul and myself about coaching and coaching techniques. And Dyke was more like a grandfather, when we played at Youngstown, we used to practice up at Liberty, across the street from where Liberty High School is. They had an empty field. That's where we practiced. And the 2 years I was at YSU, the only time after we broke camp at Camp Fitch, the only time we ever wore pads was on game day. We'd go to practice and we'd wear our helmets, but it was like a pro day. And all we would do is we'd do physical stuff to stay in shape, run and calisthenics and things like that. But most of the time, we would work half the practice on offense and half the practice on defense. And Dyke was I can't say enough good things about Dyke Beatty and Willard Webster. Willard Webster was the athletic director, the head trainer, and Dom Roselli, who was the basketball coach, was an assistant in football. Then we had a guy named Ralph Wolf, who had played at Ohio State. He was one of the assistants. And then we had Ralph Robinette, who had been the head coach at Brand and had retired. He helped coach. I mean, we had some good coaches, guys who knew about the game and wanted to impart it to us. And I always wanted to know that part about the game. I just, I wanted to know, why did they teach us to do it this way and things like that. And because I was inquisitive about it and would ask questions, they would spend time and talk to me about it. And after that first year, like I said, I graduated and I got hired at Commercial Shearing. And I worked there for 2 years until Jimmy DeRamo hired me at Fitch. And I coached 1 year at Frank-Old with a guy named Jim Rich, who had played at YSU. He was a Pennsylvania guy. And Then I went to Ursuline, and I was there with Ed and Paul Palumbo and Bobby Stoops and Joe Saramuga and Ralph Sandine and my nephew Bob Terlecki, who later on was the head coach at Matthews, and then was a longtime assistant at Howland and at JFK for Tony Napolet. So it's like
Yeah.
the coaching bug bit a lot of people in my family, brother-in-laws, nephews. I just found out today at my granddaughter's graduation that my nephew, John Klein, who was the defensive coordinator at W&J and then was the defensive coordinator at Heidelberg and coached at Mooney when they won a state championship in '87 and, coached at Akron, Coventry, where my son Neil's the principal. And one of the players he coached was James Harrison, who played for the Eagles or for the Steelers. And Johnny's going back into coaching this year. He's going to be coaching at Beaver Local. And, he's knowledgeable about the game. I think he was a defensive coordinator at the collegiate level for maybe 10 years altogether at 2 schools. And he's very, he's a teacher. And I think that's what's missing today in some of the coaching. The fact that when I got into it, you had to teach school in order to coach. As a result, I think that if you were a classroom teacher, the way you taught kids carried over to how you coach football. You taught them techniques. You taught them you got to take this step. You got to take that step. You got to be in this position. This is how you take a block on, how you shed a block. And those kind of things, I think, sometimes are missing in coaching today. So much of it is like run and shoot. It's almost like a basketball game. And but the whole time I coached, I loved it. I thought it was a great job. My dad worked in a steel mill in the Open Heart where they made steel. And he thought that job was why the United States became a world power, because of the steel. And what he took pride in what he did. And I saw that. And as I started to get on into my adult life, he was always my hero as a kid. And that's who I wanted to impress him. So I went to coaching clinics. I got college coaches aside, talked to them to learn how you do this. What's your belief behind the eye draw? Why are you teaching it this way? I wanted to learn those things. And I was fortunate that the guys I coached with or coached under, whether, I was an assistant to Jim DeRamo. I was an assistant to Ed Mady. Then I became the head coach at Wilson. Then I went to Mooney as an assistant under Don Bush. And I left there and went to Fitch to be an assistant under my oldest son, Neil. So I was always with people I respected, looked up to, and they were students of the game. They wanted to learn,
Yeah, you made a good point there. It would be really, really difficult to coach with somebody that you don't respect.
Oh,
Right. It
yeah.
would not be fun.
It would not be a happy situation.
No, not at all. What was the reason? You talked about your time at YSU and your high level playing career. How come you chose to go the high school route and maybe not choose a collegiate path?
Well, I was an assistant at Ursuline, and the head coach at Adrian College was Bill. He passed away. He was a Rand guy. I can't think of his last name now. It'll come to me. And his assistant, Jimmy DeRamo, was coaching up there at the time. Had retired at Fitch as the coach and got hired up there. And I was at a wedding, and at that time, My wife had just given birth to Brian, our second son, and we were living in an apartment over in Boardman. And I'm at the wedding, and I'm introduced to a guy who's coaching at Adrian, and he was a Fitch guy. And we're talking, and we start talking defense, and he started asking me questions about because we ran a 50 slant defense, and that's what they were running. And I talked to him and everything, and told him I was teaching kids to run the 50 slant, and I get a call a couple days later. It's from the head coach at Adrian. He offered me a job. And I was like all excited because I wanted to go to college. And after he offered me the job, he says, I'll give you a couple of days, let me know about it. Well, I talked it over with my wife. I'd have been coaching at Adrian College, and I'd have been teaching at one of the schools in the Adrian school system. And we had the two kids. I mean, I think my first teaching job, I coached American history, geography, and I coached football and basketball. I think my total income in that year was $6,400. And now they're offering me to go to college, and they said, "Oh, we'll pay you like $8,000." And I'm like, "Wow, that's a big raise, But the dynamics, it just wasn't the right time for us. And then I turned that down, and then I went to Chaney, and I loved Chaney and loved the kids and the coaches, and that became my thing. I felt that if I stayed in high school football, I could impact some young men's lives and help them along their way to reach their dream, whatever it might be, whether it was to play college football or become an accountant. It didn't matter to me, but I just wanted to help the kid find out what was important to him and to get there. And like I said, fortunately, I was able to have some success doing that.
Can we talk about that first team that you had at Wilson? And if you don't remember details, that's okay. But you get the job there in '79. What is the situation with Wilson coming into that job?
Okay, I got the job in March of '79, and the principal at Wilson was Steve Fabry, and his son I had coached at Chaney, and I had his son in class, coached him, and his daughter was a Lariat in the dance line at Chaney, so I knew them. And when I applied for the job, there was about 30 applicants, and then it got down to I think they cut it to like 4. And then they interviewed us a second time, and then they said they'd let us know. And then I got hired, and I think one of the reasons why I got hired at Wilson was the fact that Steve's sons, Steve Jr. and his daughter, recommended me to their dad. And I think that was a big factor in me getting the job. And then when I got the job, the first meeting I had with kids who wanted to play football, there was like 90 kids there. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot of bodies. And they made an agreement. I had a study hall last period of the day at Chaney. So they made an agreement when I was done with my last teaching period, I could leave and go over to the South Side to start a fitness program. And that's what I did. And after I would get there and get squared away in the locker room, the kids would come down after school, and we were doing the same thing there that I had done at Chaney. We did agilities and that. We lifted weights. We ran the steps. We did all the stuff in the school that we could to get them ready to play. At that time, when I went to Wilson, they had a universal weight machine. I mean, I'm I get them in. We're working on. We had no free weights at all, none, and we had a lift-a-thon. I raised money and we started buying free weights. And I think we bought the first year I was there, we might have bought 2 Olympic sets. And then I got some people in the community to make different things for me. One guy made a leg press machine from Comco Steel. And we put there was a Wilson alum who had a steel company on Midlothian, and he would get discs of steel. I got them. They took them down to Schaffen. They bored holes in them for an Olympic weight so we could use them on the bars. We put it on that weight machine. I mean, the weight machine, one plate on there was so thick it weighed like 275 pounds. And the kids would get under the machine and push it up and down, and we did all kind of stuff. And the guys who worked for me that first year, Ray Griffin helped me coach. He was a South guy. His son Blaine went to Wilson, is now a councilman in Cleveland, is doing very well. And then we had Dickie Banks, who was a legend on the South Side, had played at Wilson and had been one of the coaches for the Little Red Men. I hired him. And then I hired Bobby Patton and Kenny Kavanaugh, who I had coached, and they played on the undefeated team at Chaney in '74. So those guys were young. They were like 20, 21 years old. Gene Martorelli, he was a Chaney guy. John Monroe, he was a Chaney guy. And those guys, that was my first staff. And we worked hard with the kids. I think that year we were 3-7. One of the kids who was Eddie Demechko played tight end. He got recruited by Youngstown, went to Youngstown, played at Youngstown. We had 2 good running backs, Johnny Murray and Jack Hamilton. And we were young on the offensive line. We had one senior who made all city, a kid named Freddie Williams. And then he went in the Army after he graduated. But he played left tackle for me. He was like maybe 6 foot, 195, 200 pounds at the most. But he was a technician. He was good with his hands and his feet and could get his butt in a hole and stuff like that. And we kind of set a foundation for it. Our sophomore class was strong. And those guys ended up as seniors. Unfortunately, guys got hurt, injured. We ended up winning 1 game that year. The only game we won was we beat Chaney. And I lost. We had 2 scrimmages against Harding and Ursuline. And I lost 2 running backs in those 2 scrimmages, starting running backs. We played Boardman opening week. And I started Terrence Tubbs. I started Kevin Smirkansky. And we had Mitch Zupko at quarterback. If you see Mitch today, he's like Mr. Hulk. I mean, he got into weightlifting. I mean, he could probably lift the studio you guys are in. I mean, that's, he was a policeman in Camel. We had some good kids. Joey DeGennaro, he was the fullback. He broke his wrist on a screen pass against Ursuline. So we played Boardman, and Kozar was a senior. And we're winning the game 8-7. There's like maybe 5 minutes left in the game. They punt the ball to us. Boardman had a running back named Steve Greasock that went to play at Ohio State. The ball comes down, hits him in the head, bounces in the air. We catch it running in for a touchdown. Now, I know the rule is you can't advance a muff kick, but it should be our ball, 1st and 10 on like Borman's 6-yard line. The referee, who's 60 yards away, runs all the way down. The back judge called touchdown, which I knew was a mistake. But he goes down, overrules the back judge, overrules us for possession, and gives the ball back to Boardman. They drive the ball and they punt it to us. We got the ball. We're driving for it. We're on about maybe their 35, 40-yard line. It's like 4th and a yard or something like that. And I says, there's like 2 minutes left in the game. I says, why give the ball back to Kozar? We'll go for the 1st and 10. If we make it, the game's over for all intents and purposes. If we don't make it, then we got to play defense. And that's what we did. We didn't make it. And then with about 10, 15 seconds left in the game, Kozar threw a touchdown pass to one of his tight ends, and they won the game 14-8. And then that's how that whole season went. They were just heartbreakers week after week. We were up on Poland game 2, 19-0 in the third quarter. Poland had a 1st and 10. They block a punt. They intercept a pass. The next thing we know, we're down. And it was just a tough season. And that class, Sammy Valentini started at the left tackle. He was one of the captains. He went to Pittsburgh State out in Kansas and played out there, was a little All-American, and had a trial with the 49ers. We had a center, Joe Markovich, that went to Adrian, played there, was all conference. Gary Hostu, who passed away not too long ago, he and his brother Ray and Chuck started the Valley Playbook back in the late 80s when Vindicator was on strike. And Gary went to Adrian, played up there. We had some good players, and but we just couldn't get it together. And then the following year, that was, let me see, 82 season. We had Johnny Kelman and Mike Chrisman and Jeff Overly. And they were the 2 leading receivers in the city. And Kelman was the leading quarterback pass-wise. And I think that year we won 4 games. But it was just the best year I had at Wilson was in 89 when I had Curtis Fitzgerald and Michael Young. They were the fullback and tailback. We had some studs on the line. Keith Queener, who went and played at Akron. I coached Keith in a North-South All-Star game. I got selected to coach in the game that year, and Keith was on the team. I mean, we had him. We had Chris Samarone from Chaney. We had Sean Patton from Camel was on that team. There was 3 or 4 kids from Ignatius. I mean, we played the South up at Paul Brown Stadium, Maslin Stadium. At halftime, we were winning 28-0 and should have scored 2 more touchdowns. We were going to set a record for most points scored in the All-Star game. And in the second half, we were beating them so bad that we started taking guys who were just playing defense and putting them on offense. It was like the game you played in, Ronnie, when we played over in Pennsylvania. We didn't want the score to get out of whack because, and it just, I mean, I had some great experiences and just kids were tremendous to me. The parents were great. I taught with some teachers who were very supportive. I started a study table at Wilson in maybe 1980 or 81. if a kid was having problems in a classroom, the teachers, I made them sign eligibility slips at the end of the week. If you got 2 unsatisfactories, I didn't play you on Friday or Saturday. I mean, I wanted to impress upon them the importance of academics. You know,
Did you ever
Go ahead.
teach it at Wilson, or were you consistently at Chaney going back and forth across there?
No, I taught at Wilson.
Okay.
I left Chaney. That was part of the job. I had a teaching job and a head coaching job at Wilson. I taught history, and I taught social studies. I taught government. I was in social studies department with George Senadak, who was a Chaney guy, was the AD. Don Coma, who was the basketball coach. Andy Hamady, who Jack Bolkovac. I mean, we had a great social studies department. But that was one of the, you know, in the early or late 70s, that's when teaching jobs started getting scarce. So in order to run the programs, they gave us permission to hire coaches who weren't teachers. Now, you need coaches, but that's a tough situation. I always thought teachers make better coaches because they're teachers. They know about teaching. You know, I never thought there was a difference between coaching and teaching. I thought the terms were synonymous. I mean, what's the difference in coaching a kid on the First Amendment or teaching them how to trap block? I mean, the terms are interchangeable, you know, and I was there for 14 years, enjoyed it, decided to resign. You know, I felt I'd been there long enough and they needed somebody new. And I resigned and then was coaching baseball. And in May, Don Butchie hired me to come to Mooney as the defensive coordinator. Well, my son Neil was coaching at Wilson with me, and Dickie Banks, and Don needed some more coaches. I recommended those two guys. Don hired them, and we were at Mooney for, I think, 7 years. And then Neil got hired at Fitch, and I wanted to coach with my son. So I knew
So you guys would have been at Mooney when I was playing at Ursuline in that 90, 93, 94, 95
yes,
time frame.
we went to Mooney. Our first year at Mooney was the 93 season. And that year we were, I think, 7-3, but we beat Ursuline the last game of the year. And Ursuline had one of the brothers that went to there was like 3 or 4 of them that played for Ursuline. He went to Wisconsin and started in the secondary at Wisconsin. And
Eccles.
we played them. Pardon me? Eccles. Yeah, that's who it was.
Yeah.
And we played them, and Ursuline was better than us. I mean, we just got some breaks in the game, and we hung on. I think we won the game like 18-16, or it was a close game. And the 7 years I was at Mooney, we played Ursuline 8 times, never lost them. 1 year we played them.
Well, I think there was 1 year. The one I would have been when they went to. I think it was my freshman year. So my freshman year, Coach Angle says, "Hey, you know what? You get to be ball boy."
Was your?
It would have been, yes. It would have been 92.
Well, I wasn't there then.
Okay.
Yeah, that was PJ was a senior at Mooney that year. He and Chris Emile was a junior. The first year I was at Mooney, Chris Emile was a senior. He played tight end. Then he went to Kent State and played in the secondary. And we had Sean Banks was a junior. He had been a
I
board
remember
when he
Sean
transferred.
Banks. Yep. Went to
Sean
Michigan State.
was he
Yep.
was a great player. I mean, his first year at Mooney, he had been a boardman, and they played him as a wing back and a wing T, and he carried the ball like maybe 2 or 3 times a game on a reverse or something. And I think he was averaging 10 yards a carry. And that's how we sold him to come to Wilson or to Mooney. You come to Mooney, you play fullback, you carry the ball 25, 30 times a game. And that's what happened. We had a tailback named Don Diorio, who's now the
I remember. Yep.
girls basketball coach. And he has some daughters who are good athletes at Mooney. And I mean, that's first year, like I said, we were 7-3. And then the next year, Sean's senior year, he was, I think, in 6 games. We had won. We might have been 5-1. We went up to Akron to play St. Vincent's at John Sestone's Field, and we were up at halftime like maybe, I don't know, 16-7 or something, and he had rushed for 2 touchdowns and like 120 yards and a half. And then at halftime, we were receiving to begin the second half. They kicked the ball off to him. He caught it. He started running up the field. He made a cut and collapsed. He blew his ACL, never even got hit. And I mean, the kid had so much heart. We had him on the sidelines. The doctor was looking at him. He's telling the doctor, tape it up. I can go in. I can run. There's nothing wrong with my leg. And he got his leg operated on like maybe 3 or 4. We had a scene police was a quarterback who went and started for 3 years at safety at Illinois. I mean, we had some great kids, and we always had great fullbacks. We had Sean, then we had Reno Fareed, then we had Mark Franklin. I mean, we just had him year after year after year there, and we lived with the belly. I mean, we ran belly and belly option until the cows came home. And we would, I thought I practiced long at Wilson. We'd be on the field 2.5 hours, maybe 2 hours and 45 minutes. I mean, geez, you went to Mooney with Don, you were just getting your second breath then, and you had another hour to go.
Do you remember a game? So it was Ursuline. I had torn my ACL, so I was done. But it was at Fitch, and it was a mud bowl. It was a playoff game.
Yeah, that was the game that they said we cheated to win the game.
Vecchione from the sideline on a timeout.
Yeah, here's what exactly happened. I was on the sidelines at Mooney. And Neil was up in the box. I was on a headset with him. And it was right near the end of the game. And the score was, I don't know, was it 7-7 or 8-7 or something like that?
It was within a touchdown. It was an extra point either way. It was tight, very tight.
It was right before the half. And I mean, we had 2 formations, stacked eye and pro.
Yeah.
Vecchione was one of the tight ends in regular pro or in stacked eye. When we went to pro, he became the flanker. I mean, he had great hands, David Vecchione. And that year, his senior year, he might have caught maybe 25 passes. 95% of them was off a boot left. He was the right tight end. He'd drift down through the middle and he'd break. We'd boot out. I mean, he'd be wide open. I mean, if he caught 25 balls or 30 balls, probably half of them or close to half of them were touchdowns. I mean, we would throw the ball 5 times a game. I mean, if we threw it 5 times a game, people were questioning Don. What are you throwing the ball so much for? And I mean, I really enjoyed coaching for Coach Butchie. I learned a lot from him about detail oriented, and I coached with my son, coached with Paul Palumbo, who we had been together at Ursuline. I mean, we had some great coaches. Brendan McLeod was there. PJ were there. Those guys were like coaching freshmen then. And then they moved up to the varsity. Frank Bufano, who's at Kentucky with Mark Stoops, he coached the upbacks. I mean, we had a drill at the end of practice. He called it the 3-block drill. We'd go over by the school where you go down in the locker room. They had lights up on the building. The team, they would never get in the huddle. They'd line up on the ball. We'd be standing behind them. We would direct the defense what to do. Butch would call the play and the signal. He'd say, okay, Billy Wright on 2. The defense knew where the ball was going. We would stand behind. I coached the tackles and tight ends. Paul coached the centers and guards. We'd tell the defense what to run. And if we didn't make 5 yards, we'd run Billy Wright 40 times. I mean, and then that's what always cracked me up. We'd be running off to the right the whole, if it was an hour practice, maybe 50 minutes. And then Don would say, okay, let's go right. We'd go, or left. We'd go to the left, do the same thing on the left side. Paul and I would shift sides. I'd watch play side. He'd watch back side. And all we would do is watch their steps. Are they taking the right steps and things like that? They didn't take the right steps. We were all over them. And he would run like maybe 10 or 12 plays to the left and say, that's it. And then we'd go special teams and we'd be off the field. We'd get in the game. He'd be running the ball to the left like the first 20 plays. And I'm like, what are we running to the left for? I'd be thinking to myself. But he believed if we were on that side of the field, he's going to run the ball into our sidelines so he could see, the coaches could see what the kids were doing. If we were on the other sidelines, he'd run it to the right. It was, I mean, he just was driven, and he had a thirst for excellence. And I mean, I loved coaching for the guy. I was there, like I said, 7 years, and Neil and I, and Neil had been a GA at Toledo when Nick Saban was the head coach. And Nick called me. I knew Nick from recruiting at Chaney when he was at Kent State. You know, he played there, and then he became a GA. Then he became a secondary coach. And then I think he went to Michigan State as a secondary coach, and then left there and went to the pros, and then got the job at Toledo. And I may be off a little bit on what the time frame was, but my son Neil learned so much football from him. Secondary play, you know, we were doing stuff at Fitch in the secondary that people weren't doing, you know, and it was all because of what he learned from Nick. I mean, we were doing zone blitzes and things like that, and people weren't doing them.
Okay, so Coach, you know, going back to your days at Wilson, you know, we've talked to Kevin Harris, and you know, got his story and his thoughts about his rise there. But in talking to him, we touched on some different guys that played under you at Wilson, a handful of guys, and maybe more than a handful, that have gone on to do very excellent things and very excellent work. So I'd like to kind of ask you a couple questions about particular individuals and just get your short synopsis and thoughts on those guys.
Sure,
one of the guys that stands out in your earlier tenure, and he kind of became a mainstay in the backfield for you, was Wendell Stewart
Yes.
during those middle '80s. What can you tell us about him as a player, and how you guys groomed him to fit within your system?
Yeah, well, Wendell came to us, and I mean, you could see right off the bat that the kid was a football player, that he could play. He had some innate running ability, and he was just a joy to coach. I loved Wendell. Wendell was a great kid. Uh, I think his senior year, he rushed for over 1,000 yards. I think as a junior, he might have had 800 or 900 yards. I mean, he had a lot of innate running ability. Uh, and he did a nice job for me. I always had the highest respect for Wendell. And then he went on and played college football. He lives up in Toledo now. I'm friends with him on Facebook. Every once in a while, we converse. He's doing well. He has a nice job and a family. Wendell was a good player for us.
And then, following on his heels, you get Kurt Fitzgerald's older brother, Chuck Fitzgerald, who, I remember these guys because this is when I'm starting to become aware of who different individuals are at
Right.
some of the high schools as an elementary guy. Chuck Fitzgerald, what did he bring to the table, and what made him such a formidable player over there playing for you at
Well, first
Wilson?
of all, Chuck was a stud. I mean, Chuck was about 6 foot, maybe 6'1", weighed about 210, 215 pounds, and he could run. And when he first came to us, we were using him as a fullback and a tailback. And then as time evolved, at one time, I had him, Kevin Harris, my son Brian, his brother Craig Fitzgerald, and his other brother Curtis Fitzgerald. I mean, they were great players, all of them. Craig played linebacker on the best team I had, and then he went to a junior college, and now he works with young men down in Columbus. Uh, Curtis played on that team, was maybe the best fullback I had in my years there. Chuck was more like a tailback, like Wendell Stewart. Michael Young was a good player. And then we had, I'm trying to think, those younger teams, Jack Hamilton and Johnny Murray were good players. But the Fitzgerald brothers, all three of them were good players for me. I mean, they did well. And I didn't play Craig on offense because we had Chuck and Curtis, and we used Craig as a linebacker. Sometimes we'd put him in and let him play up back to block for his brothers. But they were all good players for me. The two Robinson brothers, Harold and Tony, were outstanding. I mean, Harold's a doctor for Metro Health up in Cleveland, works in the emergency department. Tony's an attorney in Chicago. And Kevin, I mean, he got his PhD. And, Kevin said this. I watched the show when you did Kevin, and that's a true story. He used to come to practice all the time. He used to sit up on the hill on a bicycle, a little bicycle. And, I'd come off the field. He'd watch practice. I come off the field one day. He was sitting there. I said, "Hey, young man, how you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm doing good, Coach Kopp." I said, "What's your name?" He says, "Kevin Harris." I says, "Well, hey, Kevin, you're here all the time. Why don't you come and help us as a water boy in that? Or, you can do chart plays." He said, "Oh, yeah, Coach, I'll do that." Well, he did that like when he was it might have been like 5th and 6th grade. And then he started playing ball. And by the time he was in the 7th grade, I'll never forget it. We were walking off the field one day, he told me, he says, Coach, I'm telling you, before I get out of Wilson High School, I'll be one of the best players you ever had. And I says, Kevin, I hope that's true. And it was. I'll tell you, he was a sophomore, and we were playing him at safety. And we used to run what we called 10 dump all the time. We had split backs, and we were running the veer. We'd run the veer. Then we'd fake the veer. The tight end would arc release like he would on the veer, and we'd throw him a little pop pass. Well, Demechko that's how he got a scholarship to YSU. I think he caught 35 passes his senior year, and of the 35 of them, 31 of them might have been 10 dump. And now Kevin's playing safety, and we got a kid, may he rest in peace. His name was Elvis Burden. He was a tight end, good player. He lost his life in Afghanistan or Iraq. I don't know which one. He joined the Army and was like going to be a lifetime guy in the Army. Had been in the Army maybe 12, 13 years. But Kevin was a sophomore. Elvis was a junior. I called a pop pass in a team scrimmage. Kevin Harris came up, read the play. Burton's looking back for the ball. He put the Rydell on the top of your helmet. He put it right on Elvis's jaw. I don't think Elvis ever caught another dump pass the rest of the time he was in. And I told Neil coached the secondary. I says, hey, you get Kevin, he's going to become a starter. By the time the season starts, he'll be starting. And that's what happened. He became a starter as a safety, and then he could run with the ball. We used him some as a tailback, and then I moved him to quarterback. He'd always been a running back. I needed a backup behind my son Brian, and they started being the quarterbacks. And then Brian had to go to Poland as a senior. He left at the end of his the first semester of his junior year. To Boardman. And he was the quarterback on the 87 team at Boardman that lost in the state championship. And Kevin then became the quarterback. And, he set every record up there. We used to have a thing outside the gym with the records. He had the most passing yards. He had the record for most interceptions in a career and in a season. One season, he had 10 picks. I think he ended up in his career with like 18 or 19 picks. And, he was just, without a doubt, one of the best players I ever coached.
And then, as we slide through there, Terrence Pegram, he's another guy that stands out in my head as a receiver, had a good career in the military as a Marine.
Right.
And then getting towards the time period when I would have been playing, you had guys like Deion Ingram, Dave Dyson, Jason Duncan, and DeWaylen Alexander. Can you give any insight into some of those names there?
Yeah, Jason played tight end and defensive end for me. He was about 6'3", maybe 205, 210 when he played for me. Did a great job. Was a hard-nosed kid. Terrence Pegram, I love Terrence. He was in the same backfield with Kevin, and he was one of the corners. And Dickie Banks coached the corners. And Terrence lived down on by Volney Rogers, and they didn't have bus service, and he used to have to walk to Wilson. You go down there on Glenwood Avenue, and you got to hike to Wilson. That's a 3-4 mile walk, and he did it every day. He'd come in 1 or 2 minutes late, and they kept giving him detentions. I'm like, what are they giving you detentions for? He says, well, Coach, I'm late. I got to walk in that. I says, well, I'm going to tell you what. I come to school. Here's what time I come up to Indianola. If you're there at Indianola, I'll pick you up and take you to school. That's what happened. And my dad used to come to practice. And after practice, he'd say, okay, who's going towards the west side? Because those guys, I had guys that lived on that, that were in South School District, but they were at Wilson on racial balance transfers. And my dad he had an old Cadillac. He'd have 8 or 10 kids in the Cadillac taking them home down there by Volney Rogers and Hillman and those streets. And I mean, those kids, Terrence went in the Marine Corps, had a great career. Charles Edmonds, he was with that group. Charles was an Air Force guy. Those guys all did well. I see Salt sometimes. He officiates football and basketball now. And he has some daughters who are good athletes in town. Harold had 2 or 3 daughters who were great track runners at the school they go to. Terrence had 2 sons that played Aurora when Aurora was good and was in the playoffs. But those kids were all great kids.
One question I had for you, what was it like transitioning from being a head coach, running your own program, and then going down the street to Mooney, and then settling back into the assistant role?
Well, I never, I enjoyed being a head coach, but I enjoyed just coaching. Coaching for me was all about the kids. I enjoyed being around young men and seeing them develop, not just as students and players, but as young adults out in the community. And so when I went from Wilson to the defensive coordinator at Mooney, it really wasn't that big of a change for me. I'd been an assistant. I mean, by the time I quit coaching, I had coached like 50 years. And so out of the 50 years, I was a head coach 14 years. Most of the time I was an assistant, and I just enjoyed coaching. If my legs were still good, I'd still be coaching.
Did you feel like, I always felt like after having been a head coach, that would make me a much better assistant?
Yeah. You understand what a head coach has to go through, regardless of what you look at. If your program is struggling, they're not talking about the assistant coaches. They're talking about the head coach. Right. And so, you learn that what you're doing is the right thing. I mean, if your kids are in a study table, if they're doing well in school, if they're good citizens, if they're in the weight room when they're supposed to be, if they're doing the things that are part of a program, if they're lifting weights and all that, what else can you ask of the kids? You know what I mean? The kids are going to compete. And that was one thing I was always proud of. I mean, we might have lost games, but my kids always played hard. It wasn't like something I had to ask them to do. They had enough respect for my assistants and myself that when they played the game, they were going to play as hard as they could. And whatever the outcome was, that's life. You deal with it. You're going to be up on top sometimes. Other times you're going to be down on the bottom. But you can't give up. You can't throw in the towel and say, I surrender. You keep doing and them for them and trying to do the best you can for them. I never, that wasn't I didn't like losing, but I knew what we were doing was the right things to do. If I thought,
sure,
if I thought we were doing something that we shouldn't be doing, we wouldn't have been doing it. That's just the way I was. And I coached the kids hard. I mean, I didn't, I told their parents, when your kid's here, he belongs to me. I mean, I'm going to discipline him. But I care about your kid. I want your kid to be the best he can be. not just as an athlete, but as a student and as a citizen. And if he comes out and he goes into the community and never plays another down of football, but he raises a family. He goes to work every day. He keeps his nose to the grindstone. He's not getting in trouble. What else do you ask of students? You know what I mean? What do you expect from them? And
well,
I mean,
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's about the process
right,
and what you can take out of the game, and instead of just what the end goal is now. Now it's so outcome oriented instead of, kind of
right,
what you're talking about, what the process gives back.
right.
Um,
They're
let
so
me.
wrapped up now, Dallas, and outcome right now. You know what I mean?
Oh,
They
for sure.
don't look
Yeah.
down the road like, what is this kid going to be 5 years from now? Or what's he going to be 10 years from now? You know, I took so much pride in the fact that a year ago I got inducted in the Wilson Hall of Fame. And when I was coaching there, we started a Hall of Fame and it was for athletics. But now it's evolved into kids who, and teachers and faculty members who were at Wilson and they've done something with their life beyond Wilson. You know, it wasn't just, it's not just an athletic Hall of Fame. And
Yeah.
some of the kids, like Blaine Griffin, got inducted when I did. Now, here's a kid who I used to talk to him 3-4 times a week to come out and play football. And he and Kevin were really tight. And Kevin was in his ear all the time. The kid never played football. He played basketball, but now he's a councilman up in Cleveland and he's doing well for the people in his district. He's raising a family. He got 3 or 4 kids. The kids are good kids. He got a nice wife. That's what it's all about. I mean, what are we here for as educators? You know, I was always there, and I got that from my dad. I was always there for the kids. You know, my dad, when I was a kid growing up, he didn't think there was any such thing as a bad kid. If you could find out what this kid's button was and you could press it, the kid would be a contributing factor to our society. His way was through sports, mainly football. But he, you know, and I was growing up with kids and I knew they were bad. And I used to think when I was a young kid, geez, my dad, he don't know his butt from first base. And then I got older and I realized, man, my dad was a lot smarter than I thought he was. And it's just, I think that's what is so important in teaching and coaching. Develop these kids so they can go out in the community and they'll be a credit to their community, to their family. I mean, that's what it's all about. And I always, the kids I coached over the years at all the schools I've been at, they've been great to me. And then to almost finish my career coaching with my 3 sons for 4 years, that was the highlight of my career. That was something I dreamt about when my kids were young. Being able to coach Neil. Neil and I coached together for 20 years. He was with me at Wilson. Then he was with me we were together at Mooney. Then we were together at Fitch. And then when he was the head coach at Akron Canton in 2009, I drove to Akron every day to coach with him. I mean, it was, that was one of the things I loved, that my dad was one of my coaches. And I couldn't wait to get home to hear what he had to say to me about coaching. And then to be able to coach my own sons and then to coach with them, that was the cream on the cake,
Did and sometimes the father-son relationship in sports gets a little contentious, right? So, as a head coach, Did your sons catch a little more? So two parts. Did your sons catch a little more fire than somebody else? And then when you were coaching for your son, did he give you a little repayment on that
Oh,
ticket
well, yeah.
that you gave him?
On the sidelines, it didn't matter what sideline I was an assistant on. If I didn't think they were doing what we should be doing, I let them know, And then it was funny. The first game, Neil was the head coach at Fitch. They came out like, when we were in the acclimation period.
I remember this story. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
we already had our helmets on. We were hitting a 7-man sled. And the guy came to interview Neil, and he's interviewing him, and we're driving a 7-man sled behind him. And I'm blowing a whistle and hollering at the kids and this and that. They put it on TV. Somebody reports Neil to the state. The first game he ever coached at Fitch as the head coach, he was suspended for the game. He wasn't allowed to be at the stadium. And,
that was against us.
Yeah, the first game, yeah.
And let me tell you, you guys were really so that was his first year. When were you guys 9-1?
This would have been the season of, let's see, it would have been 03, 04, okay. 05, 06. 06 was his last year.
And 04 was when you guys were lights out, correct?
Yeah, we had a good team that year.
So I remember that. I remember 03. I think you beat us in 03.
Year he was the coach. I think we were 5-5, and we had what was the kid who was such a good quarterback for Chaney that played at Missouri and then was in the NFL?
Well, Brad Smith or Justin Hood, Ron?
Smith. Well, Smith was awesome.
Yeah.
And
no, right.
We played them his senior year. And we were pretty good at Fitch. We got them. We were winning the game. And then Fitch went ahead, or Chaney went ahead. It was like 14-8 or something like that. We drive the ball down. Go for it on 4th down. They stop us. They got the ball. Chaney's got the ball. I think they ran 2 plays. It's like 3rd and 8. He goes back to pass. We got 2 guys that are going to tackle him in the end zone for a safety and give us the ball back with like 6 or 7 minutes in the game. My man made so many moves on that one play, and it goes for like 20. I mean, they almost sack him in the end zone. He's running around. They're chasing him. He gets away, comes up our sidelines at Fitch, up Chaney's sidelines, and goes for a 1st and 10, runs it out to like maybe the 25 or 30-yard line, and we never got the ball back. Chaney kept the ball, ended up winning the game, and we had Mike McGlynn. And what was the tight end for Chaney that went to West Virginia?
Keelan Dykes.
Oh, they were beating on each other the whole game. And I was greasing those kids from Fitch before the game. I said, hey, I coached at Chaney. I know what these kids are like. They're going to come out here. They're going to want to rip you a new one. I said, hey, I'm telling you, Chaney got some people. And we'd go back and forth. I'd tease them. But, yeah, and then after that, I mean, you guys always had good players at Chaney.
Well, I'll tell you what. One thing I remember, and I remember this. This was early in my coaching career, and I remember 2004 when you guys were real good, and we were in a little bit of a transition at Chaney. Not bad, but just not. We didn't have Brad Smith and different.
Right.
We weren't as good up front, maybe as we had been, and. I remember watching the film leading into the game, and I remember watching the film of the game. Okay. And we would joke like they must they must come out and push that 7-man sled like all the way around their field, because you guys would come out flat backed, aggressive. Like, it was probably collectively one of the best offensive line plays that I had seen
Right.
up to that point. And I mean, it was just, you know, you guys are running the stack and you're just gapping down, kicking out, just washing people. And I just remember, oh man, who was that redheaded tackle you had?
Brian Malott.
Yes. Yeah,
He
that's
won
it.
what's the award they give every year? The granite, whatever it is for the lineman.
Yeah. Yeah.
The year
Yeah.
he won it, that would have been 2004. I think they had been giving that award for like maybe 12 or 15 years. Out of the 12 or 15 years, they awarded that granite to the best lineman. I had coached like 10 or 11 of them, either at Chaney or at Mooney or at Fitch. I mean, they were, and you're asking about that sled. I'm going to tell you what, we used to go on a field. Half the line would be in the chutes. The other half would be with me on the sled. And that 7-man sled was one of those sleds that you hit, you roll your hips, you can lock those pads up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
They would drive that thing and they would flip the sled over. And then when we were done with that, we'd get together in the chutes, and it was a challenge thing. And we had 2 tight ends that were awesome. Frankie Cardone,
that was it.
Michael Craig, and then we had a guard named J.R. Miller. Those 3 guys were like the 3 Musketeers. When they went in the chutes, they would challenge each other. And they would be in the chutes, and the whole team would be there. And they would be taking each other on. I mean, it was awesome. If they didn't get their hips together on the double team and take them off the sled, I'd be beating them on their helmets. They just, I mean, that crew, just like you said, that was a great crew. Brian Malott, Frankie Cardone,
I will tell you that from that point, that's kind of the benchmark of now we had some really good lines in at Chaney, but we ran zone.
Right.
Fundamentally different approaches, right?
Yeah.
But that was, in terms of blocking down, kicking out, that was kind of what I based my evaluation of. Okay, what's a good offensive line, and then what's not. But I remember that you guys were just so tough up front. So tough.
And then we had upbacks who were wrestlers. If it was me, every high school in our area would have a wrestling program. And if I was the wrestling coach, I'd say, you wrestle and then you play football in the fall. When you're not playing football, you wrestle. I mean, those kids that we had that played for us at Fitch that were wrestlers, they were some of the toughest kids and best players we had. Freddie Weidenthal, Brian Weidenthal, the Pankowitz brothers. I mean, these guys were champion wrestlers and would have, in a wrestling season, they'd go 35 and 2 or 3, make it to the state. And then those guys were all great football players for us at Fitch.
Coach, one of the things that I'd like to ask you about, and it comes from your vast experience and the longevity of your career, and it's one of those points that I don't think a lot of coaches early on think about, and then it's not really talked about. When you take on that coaching role within the inner city, at some point, the longer you stay in it, you realize that there's an effect that living in the city brings and coaching those guys brings. So you may have some guys that run into trouble with the law. You may unfortunately get to the point where you see a kid that you tutored, mentored every day and pushed and encouraged, become a victim of some of the circumstances around the neighborhood. Did you have any experiences like that throughout your coaching career? And if you did, how, as a coach, how do you cope with that, knowing that, you've done your best, you've tried to steer an individual in a certain direction or point them in the direction and give them a positive moral foundation and things to work off. But, reality is reality. And sometimes, a kid, you may lose a kid here and there over the years.
Yes. We had some kids who, were involved in stuff when they were in school. And then after they got out of school, the streets just ate them up. They got in trouble. The kids who really did well, Ron, were the kids who, once they graduated, and so much of it has to do with your environment. I used to tell kids all the time, if you're doing something you shouldn't be doing and you're running around with a crowd, sooner or later, if you're not doing it to begin with, you will, or you won't be part of that crowd. I said, kids don't gravitate to people that are completely different than they are and have different goals than they have. I had some kids that played for me that were good players, good, not just good football players, good basketball players. I had two kids who were really close with my son, Brian. They used to come to my house, pick him up. They'd go out together. Brian and a kid who played for me, Sammy Gianfrancisco. He was a little fullback, strong safety, tough kid, was a boxer, did Golden Gloves and that. And I coached with Sammy. The last couple of years I coached in 15 and 16, I coached at Ursuline for Larry Kemp. And, my son, Brian, was running around with those guys. And fortunately, Brian had an environment he could go back to where he was getting positive support. So much of the kids who get in trouble, they don't have the support at home that they should have. Maybe it's a one-parent home, or they have both parents, but the parents themselves have problems. I mean, if a kid grows up in that kind of environment, for him not to fall into it is like a miracle if he doesn't. And that's what happened with some of these kids I coached. They got out in the community. They start running around with guys who were doing things they shouldn't have been doing, and they got in trouble. I mean, the Fitzgeralds lost a young brother. I mean, the youngest one was like in 8th grade or 9th grade at Adams, was going to come to Wilson, and he got shot and killed. Alan Ward got in trouble. Michael Young got in trouble. Curtis Mann got in trouble. So much of it, and these guys were great kids. I mean, I never had one problem with these kids. But when they get away from you, it's almost like you see these kids and you wish you could take them home with you and they could live with you and see what it should be like. You know what I mean? And it didn't matter to me. And whether the kid was white, black, pink, purple, it didn't matter to me. I mean, I had white kids that got in trouble. So much of our society wants to point a finger at somebody and says, well, that's how they live. That's why they're this way. Well, that's bull. A kid, if you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old and you're growing up in that kind of environment, it's almost like, what do you do to save these kids? And I'm like my dad. I believe if the kid gets involved in sports and he has something to do, something to put his time in, something that's going to encourage him, that he'll be successful, that he'll do okay. They don't have to be all Americans. They don't have to be doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs. What they got to do is just be solid citizens. And if you develop kids like that, then you've done your job, And I never, I felt bad for kids I coached who got in trouble. I tried to help them. I mean, you can help some kids and some kids you can't help. I mean, you do the best you can. The kid has to make a decision sooner or later. And it's not always, it's none of them ever disrespected me. None of them ever looked down or any of that stuff. And their parents were the same way. But you feel so bad for them when it happens. If you could just take the kid and put your arm around him and say, hey, you mean something to me. You're important to me. Don't waste your life. And like guys like Terrence and Charles Edmonds and Frankie Persick and Rob Navarro. I mean, those guys went in the armed forces or they went to small colleges and they got educations and they moved on. I've always felt I want my kids to be better than I was. I didn't want my kids to be like me. I wanted them to be better. And that's the way I was raised. My dad worked in the mill. There was no way he was beating it in my head when I was a kid. You're going to end up in the mill. You're going to college. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. And I was like, hey, Dad, whatever you tell me, And my mom was supportive too. And then, I was fortunate, like I told you before, I grew up in a golden time to grow up. The 50s, people cared about each other. I lived in a neighborhood. We never even locked the doors in our house. I mean, the side door in the house was always open. And, it wasn't until we started going on family vacations that my mom and dad ever locked the house. And in the summertime, the doors were wide open. The windows were up, the screens. I used to sleep on the front porch with my dad. I thought it was a big adventure. Yeah, and I wasn't the only kid that grew up in Struthers like that. There was other kids that I was fortunate to grow up with. And, but you can't give up. You got to keep trying to help kids because the kids are the future of this country. If you don't help them now and they don't ever get any help, what's going to happen to the general community and then the general country? I've always felt, kids are there to be saved and helped if you can. And you do what you can, and then sooner or later, they got to make a decision.
Ron, is there any other areas you want to kind of hit? I can't hear you.
I can't hear Ron.
No, I'm very satisfied with how you wrap that up and explain that there.
Well, thank you.
So you want to wrap this up? Okay. So Coach Kopp, how the title of the podcast is One More Down. And so with that theme and with that concept, one of the last question that we ask all of our guests on is, if you had one more down to either relive, experience, or redo, what would that one more down be? Who would be with you? And what would that look like?
Well, I've thought about this because I knew you guys were going to ask me that sooner or later. And I had so many thoughts run through my head. I thought, boy, if I had one more down, it would be to play on the undefeated team for one more down at Ursuline from 56. Or it would be to coach one more down on the undefeated team in 74 at Chaney. But the more I think about it, if I had one more down to do anything, it would be with my wife and my children. My wife is the greatest decision I ever made in my life. We'll be married 57 years at the end of July.
Wow.
Everything I value in my life, my children, my grandchildren, are because of her. That's just the way I feel. I'm getting emotional about it because, I mean, you've been married as long as I have, and you guys know that. I mean, there's ups and downs. There's good days and there's bad days. But I've been blessed my whole life, and I was blessed to marry her. She was an only child. Her parents, my in-laws, Joseph and Julia George, were just tremendous people. They did an unbelievable job with my wife. When we were in high school, she was a majorette at Ursuline. That's when the Ursuline band was really tremendous. And I was fortunate, as crazy as I was when I was younger, to end up with her. I really believe that that's been the major blessing in my life. That and the fact that I value my children so much, and that I was able to coach all the years I did and make the friendships. I coached them hard, but I loved them, and I let them know that. I never was one of those guys that held his feelings in. My heart was always on my sleeve. If a kid did a great job, I was the first one to be hugging him and pounding him on his helmet. And I mean, that's just how I was. And I'm getting older, but I don't think I would change anything as far as how I perceive kids and how I feel about them. But my one more down would be with my wife and my family. I got 5 children. I got 15 grandchildren. I got a great grandchild. I had a granddaughter that graduated from Ursuline. We had her graduation party today, and she and her brother both graduated from Ursuline, and I had a daughter that graduated from Mooney. The other 4 graduated from Boardman. But my life is full. I'm so thankful for all the experiences I've had in my life. But it all goes back to my wife. I know what kind of person I was before we got married, and I know what kind of person I am now. And I'm a better person because of her. It's that simple. She's had a tremendous impact on my life, almost as much as my own parents. And it's just a different. You look at those things and you say, why did this happen to me? I mean, what did I do to deserve this? And I don't think you do anything to deserve it. I think the Lord decides, this is the way it's going to be for you. And that's how I look at my life. And I loved coaching. I loved it. It was never a job to me, and when I first started, I knew I would enjoy coaching. I didn't know if I'd enjoy being in a classroom. I thought, geez, I don't know, maybe in a gym class, but being in a classroom with 30 kids and have to teach them about the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, I don't know. Well, the first year I taught at Frank Ole, it took me about a month to realize there's no difference between teaching and coaching. They're synonymous. You want to be a good coach, you better be a good teacher. And I loved teaching. I loved being around kids, and that's been my life. I don't apologize for anything. I take pride in what I did, and I take pride in my family.
No, Coach Kopp, that's one of the best ones that I've heard thus far. You expressing yourself in that manner and bringing it back to what's important and at the forefront. and who is that person that allowed you to do those things and be able to experience that part of your life for yourself. It just is a testament to the coach that you are, the teacher that you are, the father and the husband that you are. And
Well,
I'm
thanks, Ron.
so
I appreciate that.
so grateful to have gotten to, hear your full take on your experiences and what those moments meant to you, what that done for you. And then, having that short little period where I got to experience what it was like to be one of your players. You've always been a very large figure, as far as us Southside kids go. Everybody knows you, but this is confirmation that it's all genuine. There's nothing fake about it, and I thank you for giving us that time.
Oh, I can't thank you two enough for even thinking about doing this with me. I really enjoyed it. It's a real a great thing for me personally and for my family. Uh, if I could give you some suggestions, if you need other people to get involved with, or looking for people to interview, Bob Stoops from South would be one. I coached with Bobby and coached against him. My brother-in-law, Ed Klein, he was the head coach at Camel, the head coach at Girard, the head coach at Ursuline. He's had a great career in his life. And, I was just fortunate to coach with those guys and learn from them. Bubbles, I used to get the biggest kick out of him when we were at Ursuline. He loved defense. He didn't care. If he had a choice, he would never coach it down on offense. But defense, he loved it. And we used to, when we would scrimmage, I would take the JVs and I'd get in a huddle and I'd tell them to do all kind of crazy stuff. The defense would be lined up. Stoops would be right behind the nose man between the two linebackers. I mean, he'd get run over in practice and everything else, but he was so intense about it. And I would tell the JV lineman, I said, when you go to the line of scrimmage, tell Coach Stoops his defense stinks. He go, oh, they'd say, we can't say that. We can't say that. I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you don't tell him, when you come back to the huddle, I'm going to drill you. You understand? I'm not going to tap you. I'm going to drill you. They'd go up to the line. They'd say, Coach Stoops, your defense stinks. He'd go nuts. He'd go crazy. And I would laugh. I had more fun doing that. And, that's what it's out there for. Kids want to play football. They want to be successful, but they want to enjoy it. If you're playing football and you don't enjoy playing it, and you don't have to be a star of the team, being part of it, being part of something bigger than you. That's what it's all about. I loved playing. I loved coaching. I loved teaching. Like I said, I've been blessed, and I can't thank you two enough for taking your time out of your busy day to think enough of me to do this. And believe me, it's been a blessing for me.
Well, it's, you mentioned it about the family. You invest in people, right? You coach kids, you make those relationships. And, even from someone like me, having never coached with you, but just watching you from afar and kind of being in that brotherhood, so to speak, of coaches, you appreciate the guys who have paved the way before you. So, that's definitely, it's you saying thank you to us. We also say thank you to you as well.
Well, I appreciate
So,
that, Dallas, and
yeah.
you keep helping those young people out there at Western Reserve, and God bless to you and your family. Same to you, Ronnie. Thanks again, and good luck to both of you and your families. And I'll tell my wife we'll remember you guys in our prayers.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thank you.
You're
Definitely.
welcome.